welcome everybody. This is a chat that we'll have tonight about adolescent literature in the ELA classroom. And I'm Kevin Moberg with Dickinson State University. You should be able to see on your screen my email address. If you'd like to ever email me with follow-up questions or comments, you surely are welcome to do that. I'll end the presentation by posting my email address one more time. And I was going to give you an overview of the things I'm ready to chat about, but also the invitation that questions that you might have, you are welcome to steer the conversation towards your questions as well. That's what this is. The purpose of this is to be a chat about what you're interested in. But I would like to talk about adolescent literature and some approaches to how we could use it in the English language arts classroom, and then some specific teaching strategies. In fact, I'll end with a number of strategies and have you tell me which ones you want to hear more about. So there'll be kind of a menu at the end. And to get us started, would you take turns unmuting and telling us about who you are, what your interest is in this topic, and what's happening in your world with the coronavirus prompted school closures? How's that affecting you and your life? So everybody please take a turn and tell us about these things.
My name is Joshua Eddy. I teach at Washburn High School, and my interest in tonight's topic is that I teach adolescents literature. So I teach 7th, 8th, 9th, and 11th grade English this year. So I'm interested to see what I can get for those age ranges. The effect of school closures on myself and my students due to coronavirus has been challenging and frustrating at times and cumbersome at times, but finally this week we're on our way to establishing some normalcy again in trying to put together a distance learning setup for students. So finally getting in contact with people again, and that's been nice.
Good.
So I'm Erica Dyke. I teach 7th grade English in Watford City, and I guess I'm rediscovering the world of adolescent literature and realizing how much fun and play it is. So I'm very interested in having more, learning more about current adolescent literature. And then school closure, it's actually kind of been an interesting problem-solving exercise. We've joked that the teachers are going through their own STEM day. We have to use critical thinking and collaboration and creativity and communication. And we're using, Watford, we're doing a lot of work with learning how to make videos and Edpuzzle, and we're one-to-one with Chromebooks. So just today was our first day kind of piloting out that, and we had office hours from 10:30 to 11:15, and I got to talk to some students, and we talked books. Like,
good.
Some kids are like, "This is the book I've been reading," and then another kid like, "Let me go get my books," and I pulled out my stack, and yeah, so we're navigating video and office hours, and yeah,
They're exciting times. How about you, Nikki?
Hi, Nikki Roseno. I teach at Grand Forks Central. I teach English 2 and creative writing. This is like my favorite topic. I love reading. We do lots of independent reading as well as book clubs and whole class novels. So I'm super excited. I've just been like devouring these Marie Lu books. Have you guys read the Legend trilogy?
No.
It's all about this. It's about this like virus. Well, anyway, it's very appropriate. Anyway, yeah, we're kind of in the same situation as everybody else with trying to figure out how we're going to navigate the online instruction, but it is kind of exciting too, to learn new stuff and try new things and kind of, I guess, practice being resilient and gritty like we always tell our students to be.
Right. Well, that's good to know what your interest is in the topic overall. So I will start by talking about adolescent literature overall. And like I said a little bit earlier, I indicated that I would welcome you to steer the conversation in ways that are useful to you. But for our purposes tonight, let's think of adolescent literature as an umbrella term that includes both middle grade literature and young adult literature. And Erica maybe is making that transition now with 7th graders into learning some titles and authors of middle grade literature. We know adolescent literature really covers all of adolescence, so it can go even below 5th grade and into the early 20s. The mid 20s is where adolescence really stops. So any literature written for those age groups is included here, but for our purposes, let's think about if you're teaching middle school, maybe grades 5 through 8 for middle grade literature and grades 9 through 12 and on, and what you would do in those classes with adolescent literature. And I've given you a graphic that proposes 3 approaches to using adolescent literature in the classroom. I'm going to show this again so I can make some points about what you see as row 1 and row 2 and row 3. You could use adolescent literature with the whole class at once, with small groups, each reading something different, and with individuals, each reading something different. Those are 3 possible approaches. There is a 4th. The 4th approach is that you not use adolescent literature in the ELA classroom. It probably isn't an approach for this particular group, but we should acknowledge it. Some people would purposely choose not to. Adolescent literature could just be discovered by your students when they go to the library, or when their aunt or uncle buys them a birthday gift, or they get a recommendation from a peer. And some English teachers might be comfortable letting that be the only way students experience adolescent literature, because maybe they teach in a school in which the curriculum's pretty laid out. They don't have a lot of leeway, or they have personal beliefs that say our class time is better spent on classic or canonical texts, and this should be something kids read elsewhere, not in my classroom. But if that's probably not you, then we can talk about the other 3 options: individual reads, small group reads, and whole group reads. We probably also don't have to sell adolescent literature to you. It sounds like you're all interested enough in it that you know it's got engagement factor for students, because there's some appeal to reading about people who are your age or maybe experiencing the same thing you are. Adolescent literature now, probably more than ever, I think it's safe to say, has some very fine literary quality. You can find schlock in adolescent literature today, just like you can find really excellent titles. And so we really can't dismiss all of adolescent literature as inferior literature, because so much of it is just so great. And for edification, I mean by that, depending on the titles that you choose, students can learn a lot about themselves. They can enjoy all the things that good literature does for people. And I like to acknowledge Rudine Sims Bishop. Are you familiar with her metaphors of windows, mirrors, and sliding glass doors? Some people might wonder, well, why would we bother having students read adolescent literature? But I like her metaphor that for some adolescents, it can be a mirror that reflects back their own experience in the world. And that's valuable. Like, we want to know we're not alone in this world. So if I can read about myself in a book, that's great. It can be a window that lets me peek into the experiences of people unlike me. And it can be a sliding glass door that actually I can open and go into a world and experience a world unlike my own. So I just love her metaphor, and I like to acknowledge her when I can. Now, some people ask me, where do you find good titles? And you might have some ideas too. If you don't see on this list something that you rely on, you could unmute your mic and let us know. But if you're looking for good titles, the publications on the left are both hard copy and online publications. And I like to use the online version because there are search features. If I'm looking for a great work of romance for ages 10 to 12, I can go to Kirkus Reviews or Book List or something and sort that way. Or if I want to find something brand new, I just want to search in 2019, 2020. Likewise, on the right-hand side, these are good searchable websites, not publications, but you probably recognize ELA and NCTE and their journals, the Journal of Adolescent and Adult Literature and English Journal and Voices from the Middle. Those often will have online and hard copy articles, book reviews, top 3 books, recommendations. The Hub and Book Riot, you can sign up to get on their email list, and they'll send you daily, if you want them, email blasts that say, here's some great titles, if you check these out. And We Need Diverse Books is a great site that was organized in part by young adult and middle grade authors who are recommending titles that you can add to your collection. I'll recommend another one too if you're a tweeter. Twitter is a great resource for you. And if you'd like to write this down or Google it, Project Litcom, lit standing for lit like on fire, as well as literature, the Project Literature community. They use Twitter quite a bit to promote different, what do you call it? Like if your school has a chapter of Project Litcom, and the whole nation of Project Litcom chapters are reading from the same titles each year. So you kind of have a nationwide community of a book club, and you can rely on their titles to be contemporary, well-reviewed books of literary merit. So that's, where do I find the titles I'm going to use? Those are some good places for it. And I thought we could chat to at least acknowledge the fact that while you're teaching in the next few weeks, it could be that your students don't have ready access to adolescent literature, depending on the technology that your school has made available. So some teachers are in schools in which your library makes audiobooks and ebooks available to your students. So even if they're learning from home, they could log in through your school library media center. I don't know if that's true for any of you three. The North Dakota State Library gives free library cards to patrons in the state, and they have an extensive audiobook and ebook collection. If your school has some funding for one of these commercial sites you see listed, you could use those. And it could be too that you might want to read and record yourself reading or live broadcast yourself reading selections from young adult literature for your students. You could do book talks, or read a really compelling passage. And many authors I see on Twitter and Facebook are giving express permission to people to do that very thing. What's it like for you all three to get books into your students' hands right now? Is that an issue? Did they bring home their books before the closures happened, or are they without books?
I have a few students without books because for reading, we said they needed to read 30 minutes a day or 30 pages. And there were some kids who said, well, we don't have a book. And so I tried to I put out on Facebook, what resources are out there. I got some good response from that, but yeah, no, kids did not necessarily grab books.
We are scheduling late this week a time for students to come in to get their materials. So that'll be a chance to have them get some books. The North Dakota State Library is also still open and still doing interlibrary loans. So if students need books or other resources through that, that is still accessible too, I found out today.
I happen to be married to a librarian, so she gives me lots of insight too, but I have student teachers in many of the schools around here, and so I'm hearing different stories from them about what their school library media centers are able to do for them. So the remainder of our presentation might not be practical or practicable for you in the next few weeks or months, maybe. Maybe these are ideas you can implement once you have students back in your classroom again. But let's go back to this graphic. So the third row shows things you can do at the individual level. So I'm going to talk about them row by row, starting with the third row. You could just make space for adolescent literature in your room on an individual basis. So it wouldn't really impact your curriculum much. You're going to still teach the titles that you would have taught before, but maybe you carve out time for free reading or independent reading or choice reading or whatever you'd like to call it. And maybe in those moments, you encourage students to sample adolescent literature, the writing that's marketed for and written for and published for the students who are your, the age of your students. So I don't know if any of you have classroom bookshelves or a teacher's collection in your own classroom, but that would be why some ELA teachers would collect their own books so that students have ready access to adolescent literature right in the room. During downtime or during those 15 minutes every other day, we're going to have free reading or however you want to do that. Or you could take class trips to the school library and have the intention of selecting only adolescent lit books, or perhaps even have the library come to you. Some schools, the library media center specialist can load a cart and bring the rolly cart to your room, do some book talks, let people sample, and then leave again, kind of like a bookmobile, but just on a metal cart. So that would be an approach as well. And one thing I wanted to point out, I know a couple of you at least have heard from Penny Kittle, who used to teach high school in Maine and does a lot of professional development workshops and writing for English language arts. She now teaches at a community college. But that second bullet about her bookshelves, one of the things she did that got her students really involved in her collection was she would routinely ask them, how best should we organize these books? So one class might say, let's keep it organized alphabetically by author's last name. But then another group would say, no, 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 let's put all the adventure books together. Let's put all the romance books together. No, 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 the next group would say, let's do all the books that have to do with people who are overcoming hardship in their lives. Let's put all those together. So thematic, or, I think she even told us one year, some of her students said, let's put all the yellow books together and all the red books together. Well, it just gave them some ownership of the collection, but it also got them touching the books, interacting with them, and getting to know them. So she was willing to do that. I'm going to show you a few reading activities that are good if students are just working with books individually, adolescent literature individually. So book talks are an easy thing you can do. You can talk to the students about certain titles. You can have the students lead them themselves. It could be a quick presentation, or it could be a full-on discussion where students talk to each other about books the way you might with your friends. If you say, oh, I read the best book. Oh, really? Tell me about it. It could be that kind of thing too, where you're just building an environment of readers and literacy. You could have students do something with the books, like keep reading logs. And in this case, I'm thinking of logs of their reading progress. How many books have I read? Did any of you maybe have this experience in grade school that as you read a book, you got to fill in a piece of a worm and put the title out of it on that little piece of construction paper and tape it to the wall? And as people read, the worm got longer because you kept adding segments to it. Well, in a middle school or high school classroom, you could do a physical display similar to that, or a virtual one. Like if your students use Goodreads, they can track their reading there. If you have a classroom website, they can track their books there. Who's reading what and how many books. And you could have them journal about their reading. They can copy from what they're reading examples of good writing. Kelly Gallagher, I think, calls it beautiful words. So they just track sentences they like, phrases they like, and keep a collection of that. And then probably ideally at some point, they would go back to these reading journals and do something with that. Maybe they'd mimic these mentor texts. So they'd use it for inspiration for an essay. You give them free choice of their topics and they write about something inspired by their reading maybe. You might have individuals do book reviews upon finishing a book. I don't mean book reports. I mean like a quick little review that they could write up or make a podcast using some free podcasting software, or make a video. And then the review would be housed probably on your website or a school website. Then they could create a QR code for that review and stick the QR code in the book cover. And then that goes back on the collection, maybe in your classroom. The next student who comes and opens that book can scan the QR code and read or listen to some other student's review of the book. So that's kind of good for future students, but also good for the student reviewer. And I don't know if you're familiar with end cap displays. Barnes & Noble or libraries, at the end of a row of books might put an end cap that says, if you liked this book, try these titles, which are similar or about similar things. You could have your students make end cap displays for your own classroom library shelf. If you liked this book by Marie Lu, how about these 2 books by 2 other authors? They'd have to do some investigation and sell it and know something about the topics of the books in common. So these are all things that could just, they don't really impact your curriculum too much, but they just help you on the fringes of your curriculum develop some love for reading, some literacy environment. This is a room in which we celebrate books. And before I move on, do you have any ideas for other things you can do with Adolescent Lit on the individual level without kind of changing your whole scale curriculum?
Well, right now I'm kind of thinking, like, how can we as a state celebrate reading?
Mm-hmm.
And just thinking about, like, we've got all these kids that are going to be home and some have books and some don't. And I don't know if there's like a way we can keep the stat of like how many books we've read, because we don't have sports right now.
Right.
Like maybe we need different types of stats, like how many pages did we read, and like what were the popular books that we read during this time, and just to kind of maybe celebrate as a state, or maybe even like a school or something, get some stats going.
That would be a cool thing. Alan, the the assembly for young adult literature through NCTE, they're doing a March Madness bracket right now. And on Twitter, people are voting. I wonder if we could do a statewide kind of a thing like that through maybe the North Dakota State Library, since they could provide ebooks to students. And I know that sounds like a great idea. I don't know how that would work. Wouldn't that be a fun kind of ongoing background activity? So your curriculum is still what it is, but in the background, students every day are buzzing about their reading, and oh, these kids from this other school are Watford City and Grand Forks and Washburn. What are they reading in the other city? Oh, we read that same book. Let's write to them about this other title by that author. Well, you can keep the ideas coming if you can think of them. I'd like to think now about that second row. This is a little more intrusive into your curriculum. So you're going to be a little more committed to working young adult literature or middle grade literature into your classroom if you like any of these ideas. If you do small group work with young adult literature, that means kind of an initial investment in books that would be the same as buying any new title for your class. So let's say you have 150 students all day long and you buy 150 copies of To Kill a Mockingbird, or you buy 5 copies of 30 titles of young adult literature. You're still going to have 150 books for the school to pay for. But next year, if you want to update your book titles with 1 new title, you're just buying 5 new copies of a 31st title. And the next year, 5 new copies of a 32nd title. And you're going to have 35, 40, 50, exponentially, this is going to grow, but with a small investment of money to keep buying just a few copies of new titles, so you can keep swapping them out. This is if you can make some time for students to read in small groups the same book, the same work of adolescent literature. And you could say, in my class of 20, I'm going to have 5 groups of 4. And these 4 students in this group will read one title, and these 4 students in the second group will read another title. And within those titles, some of those could be classics or canonical texts, or they could just all be adolescent literature. So this is one other way to get students to experience adolescent literature, but just do it in small groups. You might have your literature circles, that these small groups reading of the same title. You might have those books connect thematically to one another, or maybe to a whole class reading that precedes or follows these literature circles, these small groups. And while students are working in small groups with these works of adolescent lit, they should have some roles to do, some duties to carry out, some products to create, so you know what they're doing. So I'm going to refer to those as literature circles here on the next slide. Do any of you use literature circles currently in some format with your students? So Josh does.
Me too.
Yep. So you probably have some procedures that you like and have worked for you. So that second bullet refers to that if you don't, you can do a web search for literature circle procedures, and you can see any number of ways that teachers can create roles, and there's a duty per role or some duties per role, and students in their literature circles then carry those out. The first bullet refers to one approach you could use to selecting what those titles will be. So let's say the theme for all the literature circle books has got to be self-discovery. A reading ladder approach, imagine a ladder up against a wall. The rungs at the bottom would represent lower levels of cognitive difficulty or reading levels of the book itself. And the rungs towards the top would get progressively more complicated or rigorous or challenging. So you might select your book titles and order them from least challenging to most, or most accessible to least. And then the groups would read them accordingly, like the best readers might read the more challenging books and so on. So that's one way to do it. The third bullet refers to things that you might have students create. So if everybody in the room, if you've got 5 groups reading 5 different titles, you can't really do assessment the way you would with a whole class title. And so you might give students options to create some product when they're done with their reading. And I'll talk in a later slide about some reading contract approach that might work for you. And I would still recommend that no matter what they're doing, although they'll be working kind of independently, you know, so you have to be a coach monitoring their work as they read and write and discuss together, still the English standards are going to guide what they do. So perhaps you've got them specifically thinking about theme and how it's developed through the book, or finding evidence of characterization techniques, or noting beautiful uses of absolute phrases so that they can later write an essay featuring absolute phrases. You know, whatever the English standards are that you're working on, the Adolescent Lit texts can help you pursue that. So then I'll talk about this one to wrap this section of the presentation up, which is the whole class approach. If you've got a title that you think is worth whole class study, that's what I mean here, that everybody will read the same title at the same time. I'll give you some examples and you can tell me some more. Like, some people read The Outsiders, an older work now. Some people read The Chocolate War. That's kind of fallen out of favor. Some people have worked some new titles in, like The Hate You Give. So Josh, you said you do, and Erica, maybe you do?
The Outsiders.
Yeah.
Yeah, The Outsiders, and then one year we did Percy Jackson, The Lightning Thief, so book 1. I only did that 1 year, but I always do The Outsiders. It's always a student favorite each year.
Nikki, is adolescent literature, does it have a whole class role in any of your classes?
Yep, this year we did Long Way Down by Jason Reynolds,
Mm-hmm.
and that was pretty amazing.
Are you able to swap out then titles? Like that's a pretty recent book. Were you able to get that easily, or is it a big production at your school to get money for a new class set of books?
Oh, that came out of my funds. So I watch bookoutlet.com for the titles I'm looking for, and when I find them cheap, then I stock up.
Yeah. That was my issue in the classroom. It was just such a headache to get any new title whatsoever. It was a big rigmarole to convince them that it was worth buying. So I found it much easier to buy 5 books of a new title than 150. And I felt less badly about buying a new title that the students wouldn't like, because it was just 5 texts instead of 150. It was easier for me to swap them out, find something more interesting. This slide is probably then, it sounds like it could be common to all of your practices, that you just treat that work of adolescent literature as you would any text. And you're probably using the ELA standards to guide what you're doing with it. And they're doing typical reading activities. Maybe with the speaking and listening standards, you're using this text as an opportunity to lead discussions and practice listening carefully to one another. Maybe this is a launching pad for them to pursue some writing standards and write an essay afterwards or during. And maybe they're also doing language standards, and you're studying the beautiful words of the author, the writing style of the author, the way the author does or does not follow conventions for punctuation, spelling, grammar. So this is, you would just treat it like you do anything else that you would select for a whole class title. Okay, so that's that approach. This could represent actually a way to organize a quarter's curriculum if you like this idea. So now picture each row as representing 3 weeks of a quarter. So one way you could organize your quarter is, for the first 3 weeks, we all read something together. And it's got a common theme or topic connection to all the books that I've chosen for small group work. So in weeks 4, 5, and 6, now they're all going to split, my students are going to split up into small groups. They each get to pick a different book, and with 4 classmates or 3 classmates, they'll read and discuss and do something with a book that's maybe adolescent lit, that's connected to the classic work that I started with. And maybe in weeks 7, 8, and 9, I'll let people now select their own work of adolescent lit, then they can just read independently for a few weeks. Or you can adjust those weeks. Maybe you need 4 weeks for the whole class read and 2 weeks for the individual read, or something like that. But students then, in these 9 weeks, each student reads 3 books, 1 with the entire class, 1 with a small group, and 1 on his or her own. They could all be adolescent lit. 1 of them could be, 2 of them out of the 3 could be. That's just a way to organize it. So for literature circles, is it true, you can say yes or no, or say even more, is it true that you have a standard procedure for literature circles in your classroom? Like when you use them, there's a set of roles you like to have students take and procedures they do? Or do you try something different every time? Or how do your literature circles work in your classroom?
With one of my grades, it's a standard procedure each time. I tried a different procedure with a different class earlier this year, following something similar to what was in 180 days to moderate success, I think. But I think I'm still going to keep my other procedure for that other group. But I would like to try slow. That was kind of my guinea pig class. And now that I tried that this year with that group, I would like to try it again with other groups too.
Mm-hmm. Nikki or Erica, do you have standard procedure you use?
I haven't used literature circles, so
Okay.
I would like to use them at some point in time. But
the one that I do every year, I'll just add quickly, was one that, as I said, I did one that came out of 180 days. The other one I found a few years ago on Teachers Pay Teachers. And I know there are a lot of different literature circle procedural guides on that resource.
Nikki, what do you do?
I guess I've tried kind of a lot of different things. The most recent one that I tried was recommended to me by one of my colleagues. It's called the TQE, like thoughts, questions, and epiphanies. So the kids they have an assigned set of pages to read, and they have to bring in some quotes and kind of talk about their thinking. So most of class is small group based, and I really enjoyed that.
Right. Well, Erica, for your benefit, if you're interested in literature circles, like you're hearing from Nikki and Josh, and you are probably already aware of this, you can Google it and you can find that teachers have developed any number of roles. And the standard literature circle procedure is that students have come to class having claimed a role to play, and the role might involve summarizing today's reading, asking good questions for the other people, taking notes during the conversation, finding symbols and literary elements, identifying words that are challenging or interesting. So what you'd find in your Google search is any number of roles, and you can pick the ones you think would be productive for your class and your age, right? What can they carry out? And the idea is give them some responsibility during their literature circle so they know what to do rather than waiting for you to walk to their table and go, okay, well, this is what you're supposed to talk about. Well, have you done this yet? You know, they should be able to run their own literature circle. But I thought I'd talk to you about 4 variations of that. So once I get students accustomed to the literature circle procedure, it can kind of get tedious if you just do the same thing over and over and over. Yet I like to use literature circles frequently. So I do introduce variations, and I'll just tell you briefly what these 4 are. And if you want me to say more about them, you just have to tell me. So one variation is called ICQ, which stands for Interesting Connections Questions. It's less formal than the roles people play. The students would come to class having written down things they find interesting about the reading, connections they can make to the text, and questions that they have. And then they have a legitimate chat with one another, kind of like a book club chat, you know, like if any of you've participated in book clubs with other adults and you sit around and you legitimately talk about your actual thoughts, you know, nobody has prompted you to prepare for a test or something. That's what you're trying to promote with this ICQ approach. And students just take turns sharing their I's, their C's, and their Q's. If you like another approach, question categories, you can come up with different categories if you like them, but you here ask students to prepare questions of certain types to ask each other. So they come to their literature circle on Monday or Wednesday or whatever day, having the night before generated questions that some of which require you to demonstrate literal understanding of your reading, some of which require inference, and some of which require extending beyond the text. And then the student who comes up with those questions has to know those levels so that they can ask them. And then the students who get asked those questions are challenged in the same way to think literally, inferentially, and as extensions. That's a nice variation for your students when they're ready. Coding the text, again, you are free to come up with the codes that you like, but here you would teach students in advance some ways to mark up their text, even if just on sticky notes. but putting symbols by things in the text and then sharing when they get to the literature circle, sharing the symbols that they found. So some common things are like put a check mark by things that you read that confirmed what you thought, or put an X by a section that contradicts what you thought, or put a question mark wherever you have a question. Put a double question mark by something that's mystifying, you're absolutely confused. Underline or put an asterisk by something that you think seems really important. Put an exclamation point by something that seems brand new. Note any words that keep getting repeated. If the students are allowed to write on their text, they could, but most of you probably have texts that have to get reused year after year. So they could put that on sticky notes, and then in their literature circle, they share what they marked. Well, who all put exclamation points for brand new information? Let me tell you about mine. It's on page 73. Flip, 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 flip. I marked this. So the coding keeps them engaged as they read and gives them something to share with each other. And then the interactive journal involves them having read some portion before they come to class. And then everybody takes out a sheet of paper and they take turns writing about something. Some response to the text. They write for a couple minutes. And then they trade sheets of paper and they read what the person ahead of them wrote and they respond to that person's response to the text and trade again and trade again. So if there's 4 people in the group, they will have traded, 3 times until they get their own paper back again. And then having had a written conversation, that generates the discussion in their literature circle. Oh, I was really surprised, Sally, when you wrote blah, blah, blah. Oh, I never had thought about this, Johnny, when you wrote about blah, blah, blah. And there are just numerous variations. These just seem to work well with adolescent literature because they emphasize we are real readers reading real literature. It's not a scholarly study of grand high art or something. We're just reading some literature that's written to appeal to us, and let's talk about it the way readers really do. So although these are academic structured assignments, they do mimic the kinds of things real readers talk about with one another. So they seem to work well with adolescent literature. If Erica is going to start using literature circles, maybe you'll even find more styles that you want to use. Okay, here I'm going to show you a few slides that have the names of activities that I've used with adolescent literature because it helps develop literacy with students with an accessible text, adolescent literature that's quite approachable. For each of the slides, there are 6 things on there, and I think we would have time for you to tell me 2 things you want me to explain. So look at those 6 bullets. What are 2 of them you would like me to tell you about?
The yeah and.
Okay, that's probably the easiest one on the page and yet still quite useful. Have you ever, when you've been telling stories with a group of people who all experience the same event, you start telling this happened and then somebody else kind of follows up with, yeah, and then we did blah, blah, blah. Oh yeah, and then this happened, then we did this. That's essentially, it's a summarizing activity for whatever they read the night before. They take turns saying yeah and building on what the person in front of them said happened. So they can summarize a chapter, a section of a book, a page if they wanted to. The rule is just that everybody starts with yeah and they build on what the person in front of them said. It's fun once in a while. It could be really annoying if you did it on a daily basis, but just once in a while, it just mimics the way we really tell stories. What's the second one?
Response chain.
So you, the teacher, could start with a question about the literature, the reading for the day. A student answers it. And then you select a second student to respond to the first student's answer. And they can essentially say, yeah, I totally agree with what she said because, or they can add to it. Well, yeah, partly I agree, but also I think it's important to bring up blah, blah, blah. Or a third option is to disagree. You know what? I don't think you're right about what happened there. I don't think that's what it meant. I think it meant this other thing. And then after the second person responds, you can keep the chain going. A third person can respond to the first 2, a fourth, and so on. Or if it's not that deep a question, you could cut it short and move on to another question. The response chaining, though, requires people to respond specifically to somebody else and not to you, the teacher. Otherwise, it could be teacher to student, teacher to student, teacher to student, and this forces it to be teacher to student to student to student. The flow of interaction is among the students and not just back to the teacher. And then it forces students to listen to each other because they have to respond to it. Here, I'll show you a few more take a look at this set of 6 and tell me if there are 2 that you would like me to tell you more about.
How about the presenting tableau?
So Tableau, if you know anything about art, which I don't much, but maybe you do, you know, a tableau is a still scene. So maybe an artist will set up a bowl of fruit and a flower on a table, and then they'll paint that still scene. Tableau are frozen scenes in time. Well, when you do this with adolescent literature, you ask students in pairs or small groups to think of what they had read, say, the night before. What's a critical scene that deserves to be represented in a tableau? And then you separate them so they can't eavesdrop on each other. And each small group decides how they're going to not act out the scene, but set the scene. It's kind of like charades if you couldn't move. So then once they decide what scene they want to represent, then they get into their positions and they pose, and then they freeze. And now they're representing the tableau. And the other students in the class, having read the same material, they have to guess what scene is being portrayed in the tableau. And that's kind of fun. So wildly inaccurate or accurate guesses. But then a second thing is they have to say why they think the first group thought that was important enough to represent in a tableau. And then the frozen students both tell yes or no, you're correct about what scene this is, but also they get to expand on it and say, yeah, you're exactly right. We thought this was important because blah, blah, blah. So it doesn't have to take a lot of time, but it's an active thing. And it does require people to make some choices about what's important in what they read, not just what's easy enough to represent, but what's worth representing.
I really like that. It made me think of maybe introducing the concept of mise en scene to students too.
Right. And then for an added joy, what if there's 4 people in the group and there's only 2 humans in the scene they want to act out? What are the other 2 students in the group supposed to do? I've had students play the role of table, brick wall, toaster. So they can be inanimate objects too. They just have to find a way to freeze to do that. What's the second item from the screen you want to ask about?
Being angels and devils.
Okay, so if you think of Looney Tune cartoons, probably other cartoons too, in which a character has a decision to make and suddenly on their shoulder pops up an angel on one shoulder and a devil on the other. And the angel's trying to convince them to do the right thing and the devil the wrong thing. That's what this is. After reading a portion of a text of adolescent literature, you know, an adolescent character is, they're looking for a place in which an adolescent character has a decision to make. It might even be the end of their reading passage and they don't know what's going to happen in the next passage. So what do you think so-and-so is going to do? Will she go with him? Will he decide to do this thing? What they do is generate, you have your own students take the role, half of them of devils, half of them of angels, and they come up with a master list of reasons why this character should do the right thing or the wrong thing. And then one student in the class will play that character and will listen to the logic that the angels present and listen to the logic that the devils present and decide who has the better argument. It's silly, you know, that has no influence on the plot. Of course, the author has already decided what the character will do, but it gets the students thinking about the motivation behind the character. So it's a good characterization activity. And the angels or the devils, when they present their list of motivating factors, they have to justify it with something in the book. So they can't just make up something that doesn't exist in the world of the book. And then if your school community is touchy about saying devils, you can say good angels and bad angels, or come up with some other euphemism for angel if maybe angel isn't even allowed to be said. Okay, here's a few more. We want to pick 2 of these for me to tell you about.
About the major works data sheet.
If you're wanting to look up some options for major works data sheets, you would like to Google advanced placement major works data sheet or data sheet. In advanced placement classes, sometimes there's a standard data sheet template that teachers have students fill in for any work that they're reading. And it's got some standard boxes to fill in, like fill in the information that describes the setting of the book. Keep a list of major quotations, and in the right-hand column of this table, write why they're significant. Keep track of all the characters and write summaries of who they are. Keep a list of all the symbols. So you would create or borrow from another teacher who's already done this with their AP English classes, a data sheet template, and you'd have the students fill it in for the adolescent literature work that they're reading. The idea being it underscores for them that adolescent literature is literature like canonical or classical literature. It's got the same things. It's got characterization and plot and symbols and themes and other literary elements as well. And then once you've got the major works data sheet that you like, that has the empty boxes that you like, you could just duplicate it and use it with multiple works of literature. So Google AP English major works data sheet, and you'll find some templates. What's a second one?
The Bloom's Taxonomy Project.
Okay, so you're familiar with Bloom's Taxonomy and the revised Bloom's Taxonomy with its 6 levels. If you are wanting to do a contract approach with literature circles or small groups reading their book, you can come up with project options that correspond to the levels of Bloom's Taxonomy. Choose one of these 3 choices of the lowest level. Choose one of these from the middle 2, and choose one of these from the top 2. It's just a guideline for you to create projects that require students to just basically understand or analyze or create and evaluate, and then you give them choices that correspond with those levels of Bloom's Taxonomy. You want a contract of some sort to saying to students, pick one from this category, one from that category, but the categories correspond to Bloom's Taxonomy, and you're specifically asking them to recall something or analyze it or evaluate it or whatever the level is. And that's good because it gets students to delve a little deeper. With adolescent literature, some of them can assume it's not necessarily worthy of study. It just seems like hanging out with a pal, not with something important, so this helps them to do higher cognitive things with the literature, not just read it on its surface level, but to analyze it more. Okay, here's the last screen I'm going to show you with options. Do you want to pick 2 of these for me to tell you more about?
Character party.
Okay, so it's really called cocktail party, but I don't think I'm not comfortable using that with high school students, but I will use it with you. Imagine that we are all at a cocktail party, and you know how cocktail parties work. It's a mixer, so you're trying to meet new people and say, oh, hello, here's a little bit about me. Tell me a little bit about yourself. After students have read several works of adolescent literature, maybe in their small groups, maybe as a whole class as well, maybe at the end of the semester you would do this, they adopt the role of a character from something they've read, and they go to a cocktail party in your classroom in which, in character, they interact with one another, but they don't tell the other people who they are. So they just rub elbows with new people and say, well, hello, can you tell me a little bit about yourself? And the other person will say, oh, well, I'm an orphan, but I've been searching for my mother on the planet Xenon, where I crashed. So through clues, they figure out who each other is, but then they have to stay in character. It's not just figure out who I'm portraying, but rather, if I met you, what would we talk about? Would I like you? So these are characters from different books, from different time periods, from different genres. What would the main character from The Hate You Give say if she met the main character from The Outsiders? The different time periods, different places. What would they talk about? So it's an exercise in creativity, but also they have to understand the characters they're portraying, and they have to know something about the other person's book too, so that they can interact appropriately with that character. It can go quite a long time if they're really into it, or once they've guessed each other, sometimes students are about done and like, okay, I got it. There's nothing more for me to say. So it depends on how good they are at improvising. One more activity from this page.
Brown bag exam.
That is an awesome activity. If you can do it with an actual brown bag, that's even better. I have not been able to do that all the time because sometimes I'm teaching classes online, but after reading a book or midway through reading a book, in a big brown grocery bag, you put physical objects that you've chosen because you think that they have some connection to, there you go, Erica's demonstrating. They have some connection to the book. And the students do this as an examination. They sit in the room the day that you want them to do a written examination, and they each reach into the brown bag and pull out something. And they have to first write about that thing and what they think its connection is to the book. So you put an orange in there and you pull it out. And it's not that the orange is important, but that the color orange was a through line in the book that they read. So they have to think about orange. What does orange have to do with the book? And they write. Well, at some point in this brown bag exam, they stop writing and you put them in small groups so they can talk to each other about their objects and what they've been writing and get help from each other too. So the variations of that are numerous, but the idea is that the physical objects you put in are some of them easy connections to the book and some of them challenging. Like, what in the world does this butterfly have to do with the book? There's no butterfly in the book. Oh, she means metamorphosis. Yes, metamorphosis is a main theme of the book. I'll write about that. Just a creative way to do an exam situation. The last bullet takes you to another website, adlet.org. Is a pretty good resource that has a tab for classroom strategies. They organize their strategies by before reading, during reading, and after reading. And many of the strategies you might all recognize from your English methods classes or from having taught for however many years you've taught. They're probably things you would use anyway, but it's kind of a nice place to go for strategies if you're looking for something new that you haven't done for a while. Okay, well, there you do see my email address again. If there were any of the strategies on there that you'd like for me to give you more information on, that's how to reach me. Or if you want to keep the conversation going about things we can do with adolescent literature in our classrooms, I'd be happy to keep that going.
Thanks, Kevin.
Yes, thank you all for participating.
Yeah, it was a good chat tonight. Appreciate all of you spending an hour with us. Wish you the best in the coming days and weeks and months.
Thanks for this opportunity, and everybody do stay in contact. If you have ideas that you'd like to share, or like Erica, if we should pursue an idea for sharing, we can surely do that.
All right.
Thanks, everybody. Good luck.
Thank you.